And I think that's us live, Richard. I should probably tidy up my desktop. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So I'm trying to invite one CJ Bowden onto stream, see if he wants to go through the process of working out what Cox postulates are, and so this is literally what we're dealing with right now. So this to people who have joined in late or didn't see my earlier stream. To his credit, The Last American Vagabond responded to a retweet that I did where I was critical of him with respect to pushing Andrew Kaufman and Judy Mikovits. And I'm of the opinion that there are quite a few Americans right now in the hospital because they've listened to the advice that's been put out by the likes of people like Andrew Kaufman. And in such an instance, I think people should be held to account. And to Ryan's credit, he did contact me and say he wants to look at the information, and we'll see what transpires from that. But in the meantime, maybe Richard, you could just give an introduction as to who you are, and then as I continue to work in the background here, because not everything is quite settled. Maybe give us your opinion on how many people you think Andrew Kaufman's hands are on with respect to going into the hospital.
Oh, wow. Well, I don't know if you can put a number on that. There's all sorts of ways that you can look at what's happened with SARS CoV-2, and all sorts of players that I think that are responsible for one degree or another of, if not causing harm directly, indirectly causing it. One of the scenarios that produces harm is just the philosophy of selling a concept that viruses aren't real. When I think about everything that Kaufman and Cowan and the rest of the trainers throw at people,
Don't forget Young.
Young, and well, there's a list of them, unfortunately. And independent of whether they've got the degrees that they claim they have, independent of anything else, is the fact that they are making statements to people that they don't have scientific data to back up. Now, they either don't have that scientific data because they really are too naive in the field to understand that what they're talking about is gibberish, or they're intentionally causing harm, and only they know what their motives are. So for anybody who is concerned about catching SARS-CoV-2, and I think that would be a very few people on the planet who are not. I think most people, to some degree, have some concerns about catching the virus. And they're not so much worried about catching it as they are dying from it. And they're not so much worried about them dying from it, I think, as for the vast majority of people, somebody that they care about dying. And when that hits the fan, medically, people turn to medical experts. And those medical, and if you're seen as a medical expert, however you got there, there's a certain responsibility, an ethical and a moral responsibility that you have. Now, I've seen you do this, and I've done this, and I'm sure you've seen me do it, where I will get to a topic area and I will go, I don't know. I don't have that knowledge base. I'm not an expert in this. And you may speculate or try to help pull some strings together, but you won't overstep that boundary where you know you just simply don't have that expertise.
Mm.
And I won't either. So I think the willingness of people to step over a boundary when it's a minor problem is different than the culpability of somebody who steps over that boundary when it's a major problem. And SARS-CoV-2 is a major problem. To the person who's worried about this, you know, they have a certain number of options. They can either go, well, this is all nonsense, or we're all going to die. I mean, that seems to be where the vast majority of people are at. So if you take the people that are going, this is all nonsense, every one of them is going to then take the position that if the virus isn't real, then absolutely nothing that's happening right now applies to them. And it's all a lie.
Mm.
So it doesn't matter whether we're talking about going to work. You know, look, if you have a cough right now and you don't know whether it's SARS-CoV-2, it could be a regular virus, it could be allergies, it could be anything, you know,
Mm.
and you're not paying attention to the people that you're around out of concern for yourself and them. And the reason why you don't is because you're of the belief that viruses don't exist because that makes you feel comfortable. Then the question is, where did that come from? And it comes from the Kaufmans and the Youngs and the Cowans and all those other people that are out there promoting that. So when you tell someone that there is not a problem and they become ill because of actions they took because of what you told them, you are responsible. So are they, but you are too, because you're the one who promulgated this misinformation. How many of those people how many of the 1.5 million or whatever it is right now that are dead thought that this virus didn't exist? I don't know, but there are some.
Oh, for sure.
And if it's one, it's too many, okay?
Mm.
Because I get annoyed with the fact that there are people that are trying to treat patients with medications, and I'm not happy about the fact that they're winging it. Okay, the scientist research physician in me, the way I was trained, I'm not happy they're winging it. But I'd rather they wing it with a good intent than somebody who's just blatantly lying to people and doesn't give a darn. You know? And I mean, we've had these discussions before about terrain theory. There's nothing about this that fits into reality. In fact, the term is so repugnant that, you know, we talked about this earlier. The terrain of the body is a natural concept. It's the layout of the body, just like the terrain of the planet.
Mm.
But when it's so coupled in and contaminated with the concept that viruses aren't real and it's something your body is remaking in response to something else, you just have to completely get rid of that term because it can only cause mass confusion.
Yes, I would agree, and I think anyone that tunes into this, let's be very clear about one thing. Medicine is predicated on understanding the importance of having healthy tissue. That's all terrain theory is getting at, is that the healthier the tissue, the harder it is for disease to get a foothold. And if you eat nothing but Snicker bars and Coca-Cola, you're basically making your body more susceptible to disease. I mean, you probably have more comments than I do about diet, Richard. But it's to make the claim.
It sounded like the Santa Claus diet almost. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Santa Claus diet, I have to say. But
No. You know, here's kind of the interesting thing. Boy, we can get into a lot on diet. And one of you can't eat just a whole bunch of sugar, and you can't eat a whole bunch of fat, and you can't eat a whole bunch of processed food. The fact that I have to sit and tell people that day after day after day bothers me because my grandparents knew better than that. My parents knew better than that. My great-grandparents knew better than that. And if we've got a society that doesn't understand that anymore, we have some serious problems. And I think that, in fact, that's part of what has increased the comorbidities to this virus. Is the lousy health conditions that exist in people that predispose them to these hyperinflammatory states that are then augmented by the introduction of a virus, not just this virus, but any virus like influenza or any bacteria or anything else. You know, it's just one more insult. It's that straw that broke the camel's back.
And let's be clear here. Your body's response to inflammation is not to generate something like SARS CoV-2.
No, that's retarded because but that argument says.
Hey, we'll get banned, Richard, with with those words, retarded.
I've already got one ban from you this week anyway, so I can't post on YouTube for another 4 or 5 days because it's weird. Here's the thing. Think about this. If the human species to survive has to have an immune system that fights off problems to keep it healthy. What the terrain people would have you believe is that you get exposed to something in the environment. And as a consequence, your body makes viruses or bacteria or any of a number of things that causes an inflammatory reaction that will kill you. Now, what about that says that is a system designed to keep you alive? That is a system that's a suicide system.
Yes.
So
it would be weeded out very quickly through evolutionary process.
The species would be dead.
Yeah.
Okay. Everything that is fundamental to keeping you alive is more complicated than people really understand. And there's a whole series of you know, it's kind of like launching the astronauts into space. They don't go up with one computer system.
Right.
You know, if you think they do, you know, it's bad enough. It is usually it's 3 systems minimum. And that is just, you know, and which gets you enough time to get you out of a crisis situation and say, well, this mission's over. You know, if we're having this many problems, this mission's over. If you have a system that will produce something within your body that will kill your body, that is not a viable mechanism. So it wouldn't seem to me like you need a neurobiologist or a physicist or a cardiologist to tell you that. But if you do, well, I've got 2 of the 3 bases covered, and you can cover the 3rd. But see, the terrainers aren't the only ones culpable here, at fault. You know, we've got people right now pushing a vaccine on the other side of the spectrum that I haven't seen any data to show that the vaccine is effective. And I mean just very simple things. When you make a statement that a vaccine produces CD4, CD8 T helper cells and makes antibodies, I expect to be able to read data that you have that shows me CD4 and CD8 T cell responses and antibody titers. If I can't see that, if I, as a physician, am looking at documents given to the FDA to support the dissemination of a vaccine that says it will make antibodies and T cell responses, somewhere in those documents, I expect to see the bloody measurements. I don't want to read an abstract. After 53 pages, I deserve more than an abstract at the end. I deserve a table that shows me real values. You don't even have to show me all the values. Give me the mean plus or minus the standard deviations and the number of individuals with those interpretations. Because not only do they not have values missing, they have no values to support the vaccine. But when these
I don't mean to interrupt your flow, Richard, but before we really dive head first into I'm even scared to say the word before we we'll get auto struck by YouTube, but I think
Which word shouldn't we say?
well, vaccine is obvious. I mean, you know that you had a point about there are other people at fault, and I think I'd like to sort of interject there and say yes, there have been people at fault, and I think what we should start with is the academies themselves, how they've evolved, particularly over the last 50 years, into what they've become today, and the a sense of I want to say snobbery, but yeah, it's a kind of ivory tower elitism, which would say that we can't explain to the public in any meaningful way either. So what I see on the mainstream media and these channels is, one, it's either too short to the point you get 30 seconds of information. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but if we looked at your appearances on, I think it was ABC, and when you were on TV, literally you're given a minute to try to explain something like pet imaging and new techniques around pet imaging, right? And then from there it jumps to, well, then you need to be reading the papers, and in between that gap there's a very large space which tends to get filled by people who for want of a better word, are trying to abuse other people's. I don't want to say. It's just that people don't have time to dig into all the details, and so they come out with a book, a diet book, for example, right? And people jump all over it as being the new craze or the new fad, and I just want people to understand the real world experience that Richard has in this domain, and that relates to the Atkins diet. So just in because I think it helps shape what it is that we're getting at here. Okay, so would you, and take your time. We have all the time in the world. You don't have, you don't have 30 seconds with ABC to relay that little anecdote.
Okay, so let me I'll lay out a longitudinal pattern here, because I think it's important that people understand the longitudinality of things. I joined the American Heart Association in 1976. I was the youngest faculty member ever recruited, and that was in the state of Iowa. When I started that process, and this was before medical school, and they knew I was going to medical school, and they knew my background, so it's like, yeah, bring this guy on. I was hitting several things all at once. I was hitting basic cardiac life support, chest compressions and breathing for people. I was involved with the advanced cardiac life support protocols. What are the drugs that doctors give? How do we put airways into people? All that type of stuff. And I was involved in cholesterol education faculty. And primarily, we started off with two groups. We started off with people at universities, and we started off with physicians, and we explained what the cause of heart disease was. And in doing that, I've given more than my share of lectures and time. I mean, more than 10,000 hours of free time to American Heart and to people on these lectures and these campaigns and talking to doctors. And in doing that, in honestly reflecting back on the data as I was walking through several decades of my life, it became very apparent to me that cholesterol in and of itself was not the cause of heart disease. That was, people don't get this, but it's a very painful process when you dedicate a significant amount of time to something, and then you start looking at it, and you have to do one of two things. You either have to continue on this fantasy line that is wrong, or you have to start modifying and learning. And a real scientist will modify and learn, because the goal is to find the truth, not to continue to perpetuate what's wrong. And so that process began me looking at cardiology literature in the US, then cardiology literature in other countries, then internal medicine, then nutritional, then just a whole bunch of things. And in the end, by
So you actually
1990,
did some studying?
yeah,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And it's all connected. Sometimes I like doing this so people can see that the stuff that they think is disconnected is truly connected. One thing leads to another. And so by 1994, I had looked at a variety of things and developed the Fleming inflammation and cardiovascular disease theory. And in that theory, which I presented at American Heart in 94 and got told I didn't know what I was talking about. And then I presented in 95, and then it was presented in a textbook in 99 in a cardiology critical care book. And then we did studies on the bacterial components like chlamydia and strep and Helicobacter in the early 2000s. And then I was on 2020 and 2004. And what I did is I said, look, I'm recognizing this was 1994. There are at least 12 factors, and I know that's only about 2/3 of them, analyzing the data, that account for an inflammatory process that produces heart disease and other blood vessel disease that will cause heart attacks and strokes and blood clots and pulmonary emboli, and you name it, blood clots in the lungs throughout the body, including cholesterol, triglycerides or fats, homocysteine, lipoprotein A, fibrinogen, homocysteine, and things like viruses and bacteria. And at that point in time, I explained that I thought that, the number one cause of death in the world prior to some guy by the name of Fleming discovering penicillin was infectious diseases. We then kind of got a handle on that. And then through the processing of foods and higher caloric intake and higher fat intake and less physical activity and a variety of other factors, we started to develop inflammatory diseases. And those diseases are obesity, heart disease, strokes, diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure.
The only way to go out. The only way to go out.
The only way, and we've done a great job of mass producing it. In fact, I've told people that with all the talks I've given around the world, one of my regrets is that I didn't start taking pictures of McDonald's around the world, because, I've seen them in some of the most unusual places, including right across from the Egyptian spice market. In Istanbul. And when I walked out of the spice market and saw that McDonald's across the street, I had one of those moments that just slapped me in the head with, wow, what are we doing? What are we doing? So I began at that point in time, and that was 1994. Well, I did my fellowship as a cardiologist from 89 to 92. And in that point in time, I was learning to quantify changes in coronary artery disease. I developed a quadratic blood flow equation for human coronaries, which is one of my proprietary equations that I don't share with people. It was 40% of the world data, 40% of the quantitative coronary arteriography data in the world. I spent 6 months, as I told somebody else here the other day, in a cold, refrigerated room with a DexVax 11780 mainframe computer, taking the data out and analyzing it, getting it and transferring it from the mainframe computer to through a Unix program back into a Mac-based program, so I could analyze the data to develop the quadratic equations. And what all of that stuff did then was provide quantitative methods for looking at the disease, and an understanding that we needed to look at something more than just cholesterol. And when I was in Houston as a cardiology fellow, I happened to be the fellow that was trained in positron emission tomography. There were only 3 that Gould's trained in 20 years, but 9 at that point in time. Yoshida from Japan, Schneider from Switzerland, and Fleming from the States.
Mm.
And so one of the things that I had was the Ornish patients were coming through, and I was the cardiology fellow responsible for doing the positron imaging on the Ornish patients. And so I looked at
Richard, I gotta stop the flow. Sorry, just to respond, Kev, I love you, mate. In the chat.
Yeah, I can't see any of the chat, so I'm sorry.
So, if you, well, you could probably see some of it on, or you could watch, if you sort of watch this stream, you'd see it. It's on our screen.
I don't know where the stream is. I sent you a message. What's the second channel?
Oh, right. Sorry. So,
that's all right.
it is chaos this end. Give me 1 second. Let me just. I will send you that link right now. I do apologize.
That's all right.
But Kevin said in the stream that. Where did it go? Truth of the matter is, we all live longer if we just got rid of doctors. Kev, it's patently absurd statement, and there's a reason why doctors and scientists exist, and that's because as human beings, as a species, we realized that there are elements that can get beyond our control. So much so that we're even prepared to elevate these people who have taken the time for learning. We give them special privileges, etc. And the problem is that all those privileges or all that status is being burned up right now by cranks and crackpots. But,
it's very hard to compete. When I hear people say that scientists, think they know things, but they really don't. I mean, I have to look at that and go, okay, I know why you're making that statement, and I get it, because you're seeing people that call themselves scientists, but they're not.
Mm.
You're seeing people who call themselves physicians, and I don't consider them colleagues. So they are contaminating the field, and it makes it very challenging, and it tarnishes everybody's credibility. And I get it. If you're not scientifically trained, how would you know? I mean, if you don't know what it takes and what to look for to find whether somebody's valid and a critical thinker and is carrying through things intelligently, you don't know what to look for. I mean, you wouldn't put me in charge of Wall Street.
No. Me either.
That would be we'd all be homeless. I mean, because I just don't see that going well.
Well, I would just say the traders would be homeless if you put me in charge of it. I'd burn it down, but that's just me.
Okay, so I don't see a link yet. I'm not sure where you said
it should be in the chat.
Oh, wait a minute. I see it now. Sorry about that.
So you should be able to see YouTube comments, and they're mainly from YouTube. So don't sweat that. And
let's see if
we've
got that up here.
28 watching, backup channel, second stream of the day. That's not bad. I'm happy with that. So 28 people listening. That's a good sized lecture at university. Right, if 28 students turned up to listen to me, that was a win.
I don't know where it's at, Kevin. Let's see. I tried linking on that, but I don't want to screw up. I'll try one more time, and then I will do what I normally do, which is abandon it and go back to what I was doing originally. Oh, wait a minute. Voila. Oh my God, there we are. And lots of comments. Okay, so I'll just kind of pull this over here, and you'll just have to rein me in, Dr. Fauci. Okay.
So actually, I just had a question, and you seem like the person to ask, because there's controversy around this, but what's your opinion with respect to periodontal disease and heart disease?
Yeah,
it seems
okay,
that.
so that Go ahead.
It just seems a very popular idea in the US. Whenever I broached it in the UK, doctors there just didn't seem that interested in it as an idea.
Yeah, well, one of the one of the interesting things we get taught in medical school was that a negative test either meant that you didn't have a problem or you missed it. And part of the QCA stuff and part of FMTBDM was developing a method that you could then quantitatively measure an outcome that was consistent and reliable. So if we did it here in LA and we did it there where you're at in Japan and we did it in the UK, we'd get the same results. And unfortunately, qualitative tests don't allow you to do that, number one, because of the errors that are introduced, and number two, because they're qualitative, you can't really measure treatment effects. It's either a yes, no. And so if it was kind of a maybe yes or a maybe no or a little yes or a little no, you can't measure that. So if you're working with that and then you're asking the question, well, do we think that gingival strep produces heart disease? Well, you're already handcuffed in your ability to answer the question. So to answer the question, two of the papers that we published between the publishing of the chapter textbook in 1999 and 2020 and 2004, two of the papers I published were on bacterial aggravated atherosclerosis. That's the term I gave to it. So another nice thing in science is that if you come up with something, you get to give it its name, right? So bacterially aggravated atherosclerosis is what I called it. And we looked at basically Helicobacter pylori, Streptococcus pneumoniae, and Chlamydia pneumoniae. And we looked at people who had those infections. We compared their nuclear studies, semi-quantitative in those days, on nuclear imaging, and saw disease. We measured the blood tests. We did something that they're not doing with the vaccine. We actually measured antibody levels, and and then the conversion of antibodies as the patient got better, and as the coronary artery disease got better. Now the coronary artery disease didn't totally go away, but it got better with the treatment of the infection. So that was. And some people have read about that. I mean, I've gone from people who've heard nothing about my work to people who've told me they used to have my work published in their mailbox room and in their meeting room and talked about research that I've done. And I'm always kind of stunned when I hear that because I go, "Are you sure it was my work?"
or not the original Fleming. It's easy to get confused, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a little younger. Well, Flemings have this problem. One of the cute questions I used to have for my children is, who developed something? And the answer was always Fleming. Who developed one of the magnetic rules in physics? Fleming. Who developed the transistor, vacuum tube? Fleming. Who helped put the lines longitude and latitude on the map? Well, there were two of them. One of them was Fleming. Who discovered penicillin? It was Fleming. Who developed the quadratic blood flow equation for human coronary arteries? It was Fleming. You get the drift. So there's a curse in the family. And what is James Bond's real name? Richard Fleming.
Wow, that's stretching it a little bit, but I'll let that one pass.
So by the time I was in the mid 1990s, I was beginning to ask some very fundamental questions, which was, so let's back up. If you think that everybody on the Ornish diet got better, you're wrong. In fact, the only person who died in the study was a woman on the Ornish diet. Nobody seems to know that.
Maybe you better just break down for people what the Ornish
diet is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do better than that. We're going to give you Politics 101 and Science 101. So Dean Ornish is an internist who lives in the Sacramento, California area. He's not a cardiologist, he's an internist. He had an idea about dietary thing. He wanted to do mostly a plant-based approach. And I won't take you through the history from Ansel Keys on. I'll just give you Ornish. So his attitude was, meat's bad, don't eat it. And Gould, who ran the pet lab at UT, didn't buy that. He didn't believe in it, but he had a positron camera and he wanted to use it. So they coupled up. And for Gould, it gave him an opportunity to show pet worked, and for Ornish, it gave him a chance to show that his diet worked. And that's how those two came together. And so the study was launched, and we basically had people that were on the Ornish diet, and we had people that were just on a standard diet. They didn't really follow anything, to be honest. And they had their arteries measured with quantitative coronary arteriography, which is the QCA data that I talked about, that there were only a few labs in the world at the time that had one in Germany and a couple in the US. And we had 100% of the data on that mainframe computer. And then we did PET imaging, and we did a bunch of other things. We looked at the results. And the problem is that people are not very good at looking at these outcomes because, as I said, only one person died, and that was a woman on the Ornish diet. One of the people that's classically touted as the Ornish diet being outstanding showed a 90% left main coronary artery, what's known as a widowmaker, that feeds the vast majority of your heart, going away to zero. Now, if you look at the data, which was never corrected, you'll see that the second study at a year, 9 to 12 months, showed no disease in that left main artery. The only problem is that there was a 90% narrowing at the proximal left anterior descending artery, which is just beyond that. And that is, in fact, where the 90% existed to begin with, if you go back and look at the films. So it didn't go from 90 to 0. It went from 0 to 0, and the 90 stayed at 90. So that probably doesn't make you feel very comfortable about the outcomes of that, but I have to look at the outcomes because I think that's the scientific data. And so what happened was, God, I'll try to remember all the details on this. After I put all those 12 factors together, I started doing some independent investigation with people. And I brought a group of people in who I wanted them to follow what later became known as the Fleming diet, phase 2. Which I did not develop that term. That was developed by a publisher who wanted a term for it. I said, you got to be kidding. Basically 15% fat, 15% protein, 70% carbohydrate. That does not need a name to it. Yeah, no, we need a name to it because people can only do it with an attachment. Okay, you got a name to it. And I wanted to see what would happen. And I think there were 26 people. I'm thinking back sometime now. 16 of them got better, 10 of them got worse. And one of the things that I did was try to figure out what the heck went wrong, right? Because why did 10 people get worse?
You're getting marriage proposals in the chat.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I'll try and stay focused. Thank you. It turned out that 10 of the people had gone on the Atkins diet. They thought they were helping me. It was popular at the time. They were told it was good for you, right? I mean, that's what Atkins was telling. And by the way, I know somebody who actually worked and lived with Atkins that I later found out, and knew what a scam artist that he was. You know, he's right up there with Kaufman. And the rest of them, just a different scam. Well, to begin with, how did Atkins come up with this? Well, Atkins was a chubby little guy, and he needed to lose weight. And so there was something called the Banting diet, which was from 100 years earlier from England. And Banting was, appropriately so, a British casket maker. So the guy who came up with the high-fat, eat what you want, low carb diet was a British casket maker who took a double-sized casket to be buried because he was so fat. But so the Banting diet was something that Atkins had on his bookshelf. And I know that because I've talked to the producers of programs I've been a part of when they've done documentaries on this stuff, and they've told me that Atkins' bookshelf has the Banting diet on it. But of course, Atkins never admitted to that. So what happened is Atkins, when he was a chubby little kid, Atkins was not a cardiologist either. People think he's a cardiologist. Atkins did less than Ornish did. Atkins only did 1 year of postgraduate training, which makes him a general practitioner, not even an internist. He didn't get 3 years of residency, just one, the internship here. And so Atkins lost weight by following the Banting diet. And before he went on vacation, when he had his clinic, a woman came in, and one of the last questions she asked him was, how do I lose weight? And he said, well, here, try this. I've been doing this diet, you know, and he went on vacation. And when he came back, well, his name was in lights, because it turned out that the woman followed that because she cut her calories by following it, and she lost weight. But she was also a newspaper reporter, so she wrote him up, and it became the Atkins diet. Kind of like the, what's the diet in Okinawa diet? There was no Okinawa diet. That book was written in advance. And then when they realized it was going to be a selling book, they said, oh my God, wait, we better go find out what these people actually eat. Okay. And so they found out what the people in Okinawa ate, and they put together the Okinawa diet. It's kind of like Sugar Busters, the same thing. Those guys that promoted that didn't do any of that research. In fact, they were at an American Heart Association meeting with a good friend of mine, who was head of American Heart. And in fact, Bob Eccles' wife is the woman who wore red that started the Women for Red American Heart Association event that happens yearly. So it was Bob's wife that did that. But Bob and I were good friends, and Bob's an endocrinologist. And he and I were sitting in New Orleans listening to these Sugar Buster guys who knew nothing about what they were talking about. And they allowed questions. And and Bob was so proud of me, because this was the day beforehand, and I was staying quiet, and I wasn't getting up, and I wasn't asking questions. And then this female general practitioner got up, and she said, well, I like the Sugar Busters diet, but I like baby carrots, and I don't like big carrots, she says, and I'm just saddened by the fact that you say I can have big carrots but not baby carrots. And I looked at Bob and I went, that was it. And I got up. And I walked over, and as I was walking over, the guy says, and we'll have no more questions after the people that are coming to the microphone. So I got there, and I was the last person in line. Now, so why did that tick me off? Because baby carrots are nothing more than cut down big carrots. That's where they get them from. Okay. At least at that point in time, they were nothing more than cut out from the big carrots. So the same thing. So I get up in line, and I introduced myself, because in the real world, in the professional world, Kevin, you know this, you get up to the microphone, you say, hello, my name's Dr. Fleming. I'm from such and such city and such university, to introduce yourself. That's how we do it professionally. And he said, I know who you are. And I said, good, that's going to save us so much time. And I said, you're talking about this diet like it works. And I said, if you cut calories, you'll lose weight. But I said, you haven't done any research on this diet. I know you haven't done any research on this diet. You're not presenting any research here. You're coming up with correlations, and you're telling us you need more money to do it. But I said, here's the thing. Correlations are completely meaningless. Because if you look at correlations, storks bring babies. And I'm sure you're aware of that research. If not, I'll at least tell it for your reader or your listeners, which is there was a Scandinavian study that was done where they looked at the correlation between storks and babies, and the correlation's like 0.99, and 1.0 is a perfect correlation. Okay, so the more storks there were in the winter, the more babies there were in the spring, brought to the house by storks, right? Except cause and effect is more important than correlation. So what's the cause and effect? Well, when it gets very, very cold in Scandinavian countries, people tend to stay inside and build fires to stay warm. When they do that, the storks, when it's very, very cold, are looking for a place to build their nest so that they too can stay warm.
Sorry, Richard.
No, that's okay. I just
Uh, I didn't even quite understand what the problem was. If please continue your anecdote for the
do the antidote. Sorry. Okay, go ahead, Kevin. And so what happens is that the storks build their nests on the chimneys of these homes that have these fires, because that allows them to stay warm and allows them to produce their young, their eggs, and hatch them. And then as a result of it being very, very cold and all those fires, well, the Scandinavian people tend to stay inside. And as a result, yes, he is. And as a result, they tend to do other activities that people tend to do when they're inside, and that is produce babies. And so in the spring, there's more babies born, spring and summer, as a result of those very, very cold winters. So the reality is the correlation of storks and babies doesn't mean storks bring babies, but the reason why there's more babies is because it was colder, and everybody, including the storks, were staying in doing what species do when they have those opportunities. So anyway,
I do apologize.
Storks don't bring babies, but the correlation is 0.99. Anyway, with all of that said, these wonderful people had listened to what was being said in the media by the grifters, in this case Atkins, who sold them on this concept and made lots and lots of money. Now, I will tell you that I went to the Today Show, and I know people with the American Dietetic Association, some people that have been on television, not so much anymore, but they are with major universities. And in a couple of decades ago, when I was more prominent on national programs, they were too. And one of them stopped Atkins outside the NBC studios and said, you don't, as they were getting into a taxi, you don't really believe in this stuff. And Atkins said, no, it's all about selling. Now, when I met Atkins, that was on the Today Show. And I had looked at this study, and I was asked to present this. And shortly before I went to New York to present it with Katie Couric, Atkins had called up the station and had heard that I was going to talk about the study and wanted to be on. So the Today Show called me up and said, do you mind if he's on? And I said, well, it's your program. You decide who's on. You know, I mean, I don't know how he found out about the study. Obviously, somebody there told him, but sure, bring him on. And I remember meeting him in the green room, which is the backstage area where you have refreshments and things, and they kind of, hosts wait to go on. And the registered dietitian of the day walked up to him, and he had his nutritionist with him, who was always by his side. And she held out a green apple to him. And when she did that, Atkins reared back like a snake had been put in his face. And I thought, well, that is an impressive response to an apple.
But to tell the truth, I do the same. But it's bananas. It's bananas for me. But
causes you to rear back like a cobra's been stuck in your face.
Yeah. I have a vehement fear of bananas, and it translates to all other fruit. I do not eat fruit.
I just have to tell the people that are on your channel right now that if in any way, as you're listening to Kevin over the next few weeks, you can find some way to incorporate that into your tweets or what you're doing, please do. Find out his address, send him a gift basket for the holidays that's nothing but fruit.
Well, there'll be no more streams. I will have keeled over from shock and heart attack.
So all of that led to my doing further studies and trying to sort it out and getting better and better quantitative approaches. And then, of course, what happened finally was we got a couple years ago, Nassim Malhotra, who is a low carber at the UK, who has promoted low carb diets and believes that it is the only thing that will solve the obesity problem, and that vegan diets and vegetarian diets are deadly. And excuse excuse me. His mother apparently, his parents are from India. He's originally from India, or they are, and he's in the UK. And his mother passed away, and she was a vegan. So clearly, it was the vegan diet. And he went ahead to try to get one of my papers, published papers, pulled. He got that done, and Ivan Oransky with Retraction Watch jumped on top of that and went after me. But Ivan Oransky is one of those people who went to medical school at New York University, never completed his residency, barely completed his internship if he did, wasn't asked to return, never sat for his his psychiatry boards, has never had a medical license, and runs around complaining about doctors who don't know how to do research, tells people he's on New York University medical faculty when he's not. He does teach journalism there. He's married to Kate Burdick or some pronunciation like that from CNN, and has done a world of good for promoting himself and attacking other people, and uses Twitter along with the people that he's connected with to attack. But they can keep attacking that. It just doesn't change the science. And the science is what's causing people to be overweight. Now, for anybody who doesn't know where Fleming comes from, that's Belgium, and it's a translation of Vlamingen from Norway. And I'm a Rollo Viking descendant. And one thing that Vikings did is they learned about food and they learned about textiles. And so my family has 3 food chains to its name. One was Bishop's Cafeteria in the Midwest, where I grew up. Another one is Fleming Steakhouse, and the other one is P.F. Chang's. And so the family, one branch or another, the family owns these restaurant chains. So it's not that I ever wanted to get into food. I think it may be a curse, but clearly it plays a role in heart disease and blood clotting and inflammation, as does bacterial and viral infections. And so this whole process where, you know, when I first came out with the theory, I said, even though infectious disease is not now the #1 cause of killer of people, it's these inflammatory thrombotic diseases. I proposed even in 1984 that Vlamingen in Dutch became Fleming makes, yeah. So Vlamingen and Fleming both mean wanderer, which is what Vikings are. So then I lost my train of thought. So sorry about that.
So you were getting to the food. You had food.
Oh, yeah. So my proposal was that even though infectious disease was no longer the #1 killer, and it was these inflammatory processes, that if we didn't watch it, infectious diseases would become the #1 killer again of people through these inflammatory processes. And that is exactly, so COVID-19 confirmed the Fleming inflammation cardiovascular disease theory. What a great way to go down in history.
That's no. I mean, if you got there first with the theory, then
yeah, and that's what we're promoting. And the Chinese Medical Journal has accepted that, but they have been sitting on it for many months. For those of you who don't know how papers are reviewed, usually when you send it into a journal, an editor looks at it, or somebody on the editorial staff looks at it, says yay, nay. If they say, yeah, let's take a look at it, just one M in Fleming. If when they take a look at it, then they send it out to reviewers, and I happen to review. Kevin, I'm sure, has reviewed or still reviews. And you usually send it out to 2 reviewers, unless you think there's going to be controversy, and then you send it to 3, and it's, you know, it's whoever wins. Chinese Medical Journal sent mine to 6, and all 6 of them said yes. Minor revisions. And it's like, so why is this taking so long? The fact that it's exposing this virus and this inflammatory thrombotic response, why the delay here? Are we intentionally, because the Chinese Medical Journal is run by the Chinese Medical Association, and we know who runs them? So that was a lot of material. Hopefully that was wrapped. One of the comments you made earlier was the ability to articulate something to people. We were taught in medical school that if you couldn't explain to a patient what you knew in medicine, that you didn't really know the thing in medicine that you thought you knew, because your first language is English. So, medicine is a language, and you should be able to translate one language to another. Now, it doesn't always correlate. My youngest son, who's 27, frequently will tell me, "Dad, that's not right." And I will have to look at him and go, "I know it's not right, but it's close. And we're trying to teach a concept. And remember when you took your undergraduate courses and you were taught things, and then later in your graduate courses, you found out that's not quite right. Well, you had to teach something to get people a step up so they were in a better position to understand the truth. And even that step up was more of the truth than what they had before."
Well, I think there's a point to be made here that in the current circumstances, and we're in a completely novel situation right now, where before people were starved of information prior to 20 years, it's changed since the internet. Now it's the case of the opposite, that people get so much and they're unable to pass it in any way that's helping them, and it's actually likely to lead to significant trauma in some cases.
Well, one of the reasons for writing the books was to just simply put it down in a format that walked it from beginning to end. It's not that I really, there are times that I like writing books or writing papers. There are other times that I just dread it. And so I go through cycles, and I think that that's my research training. There are points in time that I'm focused entirely on doing the research project.
Sorry, Richard, just to interrupt you, but don't butt in if you weren't listening. Pepe is the first thing that I would say. But what trauma? Well, it could be if you're overburdened with information. So Richard's just relayed this whole timeline of how people have taken to fad diets, and it's caused harm in a multitude of cases. I think it would be fair to say not all of them, but and enough that for a clinician to sit up and take notice. And I would give a much more up-to-date example of that, and that's the people who listen to Andrew Kaufman. How many people listen to viruses are not real and it's just your body healing itself, ended up in hospital? And as Richard said earlier, if it's more than one, that's one too many. And like I say, I can just look at my Twitter feed from this morning, and there's still a lot of people that are buying into it. And let's not forget something critical in this argument that they have, that it goes not just this idea of terrain and healthy tissue. They have this idea of abiogenic pleomorphy, that your body grows viruses and yeast and bacteria to somehow enable it to heal in some fashion. And it's such an absurd position to take that. What's wrong now, big boy?
Password?
Again? Sorry. It's an absurd position to take, and in that respect, before we can line this up towards going to the V word, okay, that perhaps Richard just explain this in simple terms, that with respect to genetics, how you would, there's a constant between species that that defines biology, and
okay, we're basic 101. Okay,
yeah,
so what Kevin is referring to, and I think this gets to where we're talking about the question of Cook's postulates and proving the virus exists, is the fact that everything on planet Earth has a genetic code. And while my genes, my genetic information is different than yours, than any of you. There is a consistency that makes us all human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens. And it's that consistency that you can then look for and find out what the genetic code is. That's called the DNA of individuals. And this genetic code transferred from mother and father to produce the new genetic code for the baby then determines very specifically what that baby's characteristics are. And it takes very minor differences to make those changes. For example, my blue eyes can be traced back genetically to a single mutation some time ago in Northwest Europe. If you look at sickle cell anemia, that is only a single nucleotide change that produces a different amino acid in the sequence of the genes for red blood cells that produces sickling. And sickle cell makes it a challenge to carry oxygen for people, but there's an advantage to it. And the advantage is, for the people who have it, has to do with malaria. Malaria cannot survive well in sickled cells. So the area in the world where we see sickle cell primarily, until recently when everybody started traveling around, were areas where malaria existed. But the genetics of something defines the species. You know, humans and chimpanzees are 99.97, I think, percent. I'd have to go back and look at it. The same genetic material, but that small difference makes the difference between every human being and every chimpanzee. And if you take the genes, and we've done this, the Human Genome Project was done a couple decades ago now. A considerable amount of time and money was put into it to define the genetic code of human beings. And from that, a lot of investigation into what are the genetic diseases, what are the genetic characteristics, what can we target to make life longer, what are the things that will cause cancer. All of those things come out of that project. So we know what the genetics of a human being is. A human being only reproduces human genetic material. So a human being will not give rise to a virus or a bacteria any more than a giraffe will give rise to a wolf or a cow.
Unless you're a young Earth creationist.
and you believe the Earth is flat. And if you do that, may God have mercy on you. You know, because if you literally believe that, you know, if Kaufman firmly believes this, then there's nothing I can do for him. Because for somebody who claims to have a molecular biology Bachelor of Science from MIT, that's right up his alley, what he should have learned. Okay. So
he's lying about that for people that are tuning in. There is no molecular biology degree at undergrad from MIT. There's another thing that he's scamming you on. So he's a known embezzler. He's lied about his degrees, and that's someone who just has the ethics of a bottom feeder or crawler. That we've seen. He will go out and push this nonsense onto people, and I don't think he really believes it. I just think he's looking at it as a way to enrich himself.
Well, you know what? Karma's a payback problem, because if anybody next to him or he ends up getting SARS CoV-2 and he ends up being hospitalized for it, he has a real problem, doesn't he?
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
Because that's when, you know, one of the things that I used to tell my students in lectures is, You know, being a doctor, you're probably going to get sued by somebody somewhere along the way just simply because some attorney's going to talk him into it, even if he didn't do anything wrong. But here's the thing, here's the take-home message. If you do for your patient what you would do for your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your husband, your wife, or your child, and you get hauled into court for a medical malpractice suit, and you say, this is what I would have done for my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, my husband, my wife, my child, I would like to think, although I don't have 100% confidence in this, but I'd like to think that the vast majority of people would go, there's no malpractice there. You know, maybe a bad decision, but mistakes happen. But, you know, if you're Andrew Kaufman or Cowan or Young or these other people, and you come down with SARS and you get hospitalized, or somebody or someone he loves gets hospitalized, he's in a pickle. And so is the person he loves, you know, because the only chance they're going to have is getting one of us wacko allopaths or osteopaths, if it's one, you know, a deal, treating him with medicine versus voodoo.
Or chicken soup. It's chicken soup,
yeah.
Basically, with Kaufman. So,
well, you just put the chicken soup right down the endotracheal tube, and that takes care of it. And that, and a little Clorox bleach if you're Andrew Young, or if you're Robert Young.
There's a. I know people are.
God, Kevin, if they don't take this down, it's going to be a miracle, and I can't post anything for another 4 days.
Well, yeah. If this one goes down, then I'm out of channels. No, I might have another one I can use. But
we'll save it, because somewhere along the way we'll get this out. Oh, I wanted to finish up on Robert Atkins. Okay, let's set the record straight on Bob Atkins. Okay. Because I've got the smoking gun thing out there about Dr. Fleming, who went and got Robert Atkins autopsy studies. Okay, so you might as well hear about that. When Bob Atkins, so I had 2 patients, not 1, 2 patients that were in healthcare. One in Iowa and one in, I want to say Massachusetts or New York. And both of these individuals swore to me as their doctor, which means I'm not going to tell anybody their name, but I am now going to tell what they told me, which is that Bob Atkins was admitted to a hospital with heart disease and was treated for heart disease, not from a virus, but from coronary artery disease, the thing he claimed didn't happen with his diet. And both individuals said they were threatened with physical harm if they ever told anybody. So when Bob Atkins went down in the streets of New York, I didn't immediately jump up and do something. What I started doing after about a week was I just kind of punched into New York State. And I noticed on the coroner's report, their page, that in the state of New York, if somebody is hospitalized and dies, they come into the hospital unconscious and die, they must have an autopsy. That was the second thing on their page. Bob Atkins was brought in unconscious and died. Well, that makes sense. Bob Atkins could have been poisoned by somebody. Bob Atkins could have been hit over the head by somebody. Or Bob Atkins might have had what I think he had. And I'll tell you about that in a moment. So he dies in the hospital. He's morbidly obese when he's in the hospital. He has a surgical scar across his abdomen, which could only be done if you were doing both inguinal hernias at the same time, or you were taking out fat. That's the only reason, or you're delivering a baby. And I don't think he had a baby inside him. And I don't think he was having bilateral inguinal hernia. So that kind of leaves you with one option. Now, I simply called up the county coroner and I said, is it possible to get records on this? I'm not his doctor. I'm over here in Nebraska. I'm just curious. And well, let us check. Yeah, if you send us a request for it, we can do it. So I sent a request. Nothing happened for several weeks. I called back. A couple of weeks later, called back again. Well, his file's missing. This never happens. His file's missing. Well, and then before I knew it, I got a report. Was it an autopsy? No, it was an external examination. They didn't do an autopsy. Okay, but what it did show was that surgical scar and no evidence of damage to his arms. Now, why is that important? Think about it. If you're a conscious individual and you're walking on the streets of anywhere and you slip on the ice, what do? You instinctively put your arms out to brace your fall if you're awake.
Mm.
And that causes trauma to the arms. There was no trauma to the arms, which meant when Bob Atkins went down, he was unconscious. And the only two things that'll produce a suddenly unconscious person is a stroke or a heart attack. Both of which they claim could not happen with his diet. So.
Well, I think there's an important point to take from this is that never speak in absolutes about anything almost, particularly biology and its complexities. But in the sciences, you don't do that. And I think if they've gone around and marketed the Atkins diet as being one, and my understanding is that it does cause increased cortisol. And look, I've tried eating ketogenic diets. Yes, you lose weight, but I always find it comes back after even if I've done keto for 6 months. And there's something just your body's not quite functioning right with it. There's a dieting high that goes with it. Yes, you're less hungry. For sure, that's a real thing. But I've always felt like the body's sense of relief wants more, I guess, easier metabolic pathway is applied for.
And there is, because that was part of what we had in that study that initially got retracted and then got published, was a 4-month follow-up after they were on the diet for a year. We showed what happened to their blood tests. We showed what happened to their coronary artery disease. And we did something called respiratory quotients, which allows physicians to measure exactly how much carbohydrates, how much fat, how much protein you're consuming. And one of the things that showed up was that for people who were on low-carb diets, they increased their carbohydrate load. Guess what happened for the people that were on the vegan diets?
They increased their protein load.
Yeah, they increased their protein load after the year's study was done. So in other words, what they did, remember I told you there's all these backup mechanisms that keep people alive. And one of the things that's fundamental to keeping you alive is nutrition. So clearly, once we quit intervening with them, and this was one of the things that they didn't know I was going to do, was bring them back 4 months later and check certain, things like their respiratory quotients. They tended to go towards a more normal, which is that about 70% carbohydrate, 15% fat, 15% protein. And it didn't matter which end of the spectrum they were on, they came back to baseline, which tells you there's this underlying biological component that's genetically driven that has people do this. The problem is, for all of us, is that we've been oversaturated with bad quality food, too little activity, and bad behaviors. And we're paying for it.
I mean, I can just speak.
I'm not a vegan, by the way. I just throw that out there for people, because I think sometimes that's the problem. Many of the people that I talk about, like Kim Williams and Dean Ornish and Robert Atkins, they're all in on their diets. I like I said, my family's got a food line dating back thousands of years, and one of the things we have is Fleming steak house, guys. It's not my favorite food by any stretch of the imagination. I don't even like steak.
Sacrilege.
I know it's terrible. I'd rather have sea bass, and I'd rather have sushi. Um, to be honest, I mean, because you're in Japan, so I just throw that out there. Anything you want to send this?
um, well, I'm kind of tired of sushi. I mean, I don't look. I would say this. There's a point you can only go so far with diets, etc. Particularly as you're aging, right? I think there's this a particular period in your life where you can be. I don't know. There's a narcissistic component because you want to look good. Well, I guess it's a sort of drive towards mating and what have you, keep fit, etc. But the body does, you have to get old, and no one lives forever. And to me, I've just sort of come to it. I've had a few close calls now with respect to shuffling off this mortal coil, and I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna chill right now, and just hopefully if I can do another 25 years and wind down that way, that's fine by me, right? And I'm less fussed about how I look and am I ripped or anything, and perhaps, and I think this is a bigger speaks to a bigger problem where you're talking about bad habits, but it's not just bad habits with respect to maybe they're slovenly. I think there's too much push to where people are forced into activity because they're thinking that's the healthy way to be, and people don't get rest. Like,
Yeah. Rest is a very key component, I think, for people. And as far as physical activity, when we had people doing physical activity for this study, I really started off by saying, do you remember when you were a child and you used to do things that you enjoyed? And doing those things kept you physically active. So look, if you find something that you enjoy doing, if it's bowling, if it's baseball, if it's tennis, if it's golf, do something you enjoy that is that will get you up and move you around. Now, I obviously am more obsessive compulsive with with running, but that's because I've always run. It's just what I do, and some martial arts and some fencing and things like that I enjoy. But doing something that you enjoy is the way to keep you very active. And one final note on diets, and then we can find something more interesting to talk about, is that I'm also a very firm believer in during the holidays, we have enough garbage going on in our lives and stressors that the holidays really are a time to have some enjoyable treats, that particularly things that we've grown up with. So one of the things I used to do around the hospital was I used to take chocolates around. And I noticed that if I took chocolates around to the different people, the different departments, they would go, no, we can't do that. And I would say, that's okay, you can only have one. And they would look at me and they go, I can only have one? I said, yeah, you can only have one. Oh, well, which? It's like, so when you take, and just kind of say, look, this is supposed to be an enjoyment thing. So I'm a big believer that a sugar cookie is not a terrible thing for you. Now, 20 in a row, probably not a good idea. But eating used to be a major way in which people sat down and communicated. And now I find one of the things I've commented on over the years is that families very seldom sit down and really have meals together. They spend more time in front of the television than they do at a table, talking about the events of the day and enjoying a meal in a civilized way, which was really kind of a big thing for the human species for many hundreds and thousands of years. And to get away from that, I think this is one of my societal comments. To get away from that, I think, is a bad thing for families. We cannot be so rushed that families and people that have a community should not be sitting down and spending that time together. There's a lot of good that comes out of the socialization of people in those little settings that don't get picked up by sitting in front of a television or a computer screen.
Yes.
All right, that's my society.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little. So maybe we'll have gone long enough that it will skip the YouTube sense as well. No, I did see I got up once and there was a flash of my lower back, and that's what I got banned for off my main channel, getting up out my chair, and you could see some love handle. That's what they banned me for.
You're flashing the camera. That's great.
And yeah, so apparently I got my ban was for pornography. And yeah, so just like you've seen me get out of the chair a couple of times this stream, right? And I noticed one that, you know, you just sit down and you're a bit overweight like me sometimes.
People, let me guarantee you, there's nothing sexually provocative about Kevin.
Well, it depends. That's from the male perspective. The women find me a demigod of masculinity.
Okay.
But all right, let's get down to the important questions, which I think people want answers to, and I think the first is the technology, well, not so much it is the technology, but let's start with the wrapping first. And Richard, I hope
layer?
Yes. So I'm hoping you can take the lead in here, because I've not read up on what's in the vaccine specifically. I looked at one and you could see the components listed as a sort of proprietary fatty acid that they were wrapping it in. But let's start there, and then I think I guess the endpoint was probably where it ties into inflammation again. So
yeah. Well, you know, the whole purpose, all vaccines up until December 10th of this year were efforts to introduce either the infectious agent, be it a bacteria or a virus, in a weakened form, a killed form, or at least the major presentation of it that represented what the body most recognized to attack, to somehow put that into the body so that the body could recognize it outside of a cell. So if it was the oral polio vaccine, you took drops. Most of the others have been injections, right? Because it's been an easy mechanism. I can show you on my arm the residual of where I was growing up in the 60s, where we were pan-vaccinated for just about everything. And we went and we got multiple. I mean, we literally got a circle of needles injected into our arms. And I can show you from military days, both arms, where you walked in and you basically got slammed from both sides. And the idea was to put this into the body, let it move around the interstitium, as Young would call it, which I wish he'd actually learned just how to pronounce the terms. But throughout your body to allow your immune system to recognize it as something that is foreign to the body. And what happens then is a couple of things, some of which has to do with what's called natural killer cells, which are designed to immediately come in and find something, engulf it, and destroy it. Other cells that are called dendritic cells, but they're part of the immune system. They're part of what's called the T cell response, are designed to recognize something foreign, bring it into the cell, and then present that to the surface of the cell as through what's called major histocompatibility present it for other cells in the body and the immune system to recognize, to say, this is something we need to make antibodies to. So that has been the method of choice. And one of the problems with SARS-CoV-2 is that it has been human modified to increase its ability to naturally, when transmitted from person to person, to get inside of the cells and use our genetic material, our genetic machinery, to make more of itself. And that's called gain of function, as you've talked about here several times before. So gain of function is an increased ability to get that virus inside of the cell. And I think that's key, because only a couple of days ago it dawned on me that this vaccine is a gain of function. Because this vaccine is, and yes, I have seen the chemicals. I don't have those pulled up. I'm not sure where I put those, but they were basically a lipopolysaccharide, which means it's fats, lipids, and carbohydrates packaged together just like cell membranes are in your body, with proteins that stick out, that are designed to, within there, hold the genetic material that then goes to the cell, and instead of recognizing it as a virus, recognizes it as just another membrane to be brought in. Much the same way that exosomes get recognized by other cells as lipopolysaccharides by other cells and get brought into the cell to carry the chemical messages of what the other cells are seeing. Except in this instance, it's actually messenger RNA. That's what the mRNA stands for, which is ribonucleic acid, which is different by one amino acid from deoxyribonucleic acid, or the DNA that's present in the nucleus of cells and in the mitochondria of cells. So if you thought DNA was just in the nucleus of the cells, it's also in the mitochondria. Which was originally thought to be its own organelle, its own entity, and somehow got encapsulated within cells to provide more energy and efficiency. Somebody's asking what the heck I'm talking about. Oh, it's somebody else they're talking to. Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. I mean, I am a few people have talked to me like that recently, but usually I don't. And so it's a different mechanism. It says this is a membrane, like the membrane of the cell, and it just takes it in. Now, when you think about it in those terms, that is a gain of function. That has never been done, because this is the first time we're putting a vaccine into somebody and not letting the virus be seen outside of a cell. Where the goal is to infect the cell.
Yeah.
We've never done that before. And to say that we have done any of the testing that's necessary to know whether this is a safe or effective procedure is delusional. It's a lie, because you have to work through a series of steps, taking the worst case scenario and then working it across animal species, eventually to humans, before you dare just throw that in humans. So one of the things that dawned on me the other day is that this liposomal package, lipopolysaccharide, is a new gain of function. And with that came a completely horrifying thought, because in chapter 7 of that 2-part series, Unmasking 7, after we get through, okay, this is SARS-CoV-2, and these are the drugs that treat it, and this is how we can defeat this, comes the question, well, wait a minute, this happened once, and probably more than once, so it's going to happen again. The question is to be ready for it again. And the uncomfortable thing that hit me was, I can't tell you that this mRNA in this vaccine is SARS-CoV-2. It could be SARS-CoV-3.
Well, let me just sort of interject something there before even jumping ahead to the next iteration. So it's my understanding. I have asked, and the one thing that you don't see is, or that I've been able to find, is the sequences that they're coding for. Now,
Yeah,
it's
the
not
mRNA.
it's not partial components of the spike. My understanding is that they're encoding the whole spike. Okay,
Yep, that's what they say.
and this has a very specific problem associated with it, and that is that you have biologically active polypeptides that can break apart, and particularly those that would encode around the furin cleavage site. So you have to. The cells are not like machines. It's somewhat messy. Okay, and you'll get partial fragments coming out, and that's why there's a whole system of enzymes set up to break down quickly RNA that escapes the cell, for example. Now, the issue I have is beyond the potential autoimmune disorders that could occur from tagging it onto your own cells, is that in the immediate effects, we know we've got this super antigenic component, and suddenly you're just going to start squirting that out from your cells into how much of that is going to be released into the bloodstream, and how much is going to be triggering, particularly in the frail, right? Especially an assault on their autonomic nervous system.
Right.
And
Right.
I haven't seen that addressed anywhere.
No, there's no data on that, Kevin. There's no data on that. There's no data on the CD4 or the CD8 T cells. There's no data on the antibody titers that are produced. There's no data on any of this stuff. You know, their 53-page explanation to the FDA for the emergency use authorization simply said that there was 100% CD4 and 97% CD8 production from the vaccine. And my thought is, based upon what? There's no measured anything here. There's no measured T cell response. There's no antibody titers. There is no explanation about what's getting out in the blood, as you pointed out here. It is the entire spike protein, which we both know has this PRRA, furin cleavage alteration, and the HIV component that's been stuck into it. And we are intentionally providing a gain of function passageway into the cell. So if it is SARS CoV-2, we have intentionally done that, and we already know that the immunologic response to this virus is an inflammothrombotic response. So we're going to get this immediately into the cells, bypassing the safety mechanisms of the body for preventing infection. We are intentionally causing the cells to be infected. We've never done this before.
And just to answer, sorry, I just want to answer someone in the chat, Yuri. Yes, the spike is presented, or it's recognized as foreign within the cell, and the idea is that you have this multi-histocompatibility complex, right, which recognizes it and points it outside of the cell and says, there's something foreign inside me, the immune system needs to take care of it, and basically in that sort of sense. So as Richard said, there's a very disturbing step with respect to the technology, that we're not reliant on the normal processes by which the immune system works. I've never, like I say, it's completely new technology with respect to this idea of getting a cell to produce it. I don't know why they would come up with that for anyway, and think that that's something approaching an advantageous way of doing something, except beyond the fact that, well, the they know there's limits to vaccine technologies as they currently are. So I don't know if that's to do with persistence or getting the immune system to recognize it. But yeah, I don't know, and no one's been able to give me, and with I've looked, no one can get again how much is produced, how much is being injected, how much is being produced, and put that in the context of, well, I know in the Moderna study, everyone had side effects at the higher dosages. And they say, well, that's relatively minimal side effects. But let's be very, very clear that they have very strict criteria for who goes on to those studies, right? And if you have any comorbidity as a known factor, you will not be allowed into that study.
You couldn't have asked for healthier people to be in this study. You know, one of the responses I saw that kind of stuck out was they said 100% of the African Americans had no bad reaction. There weren't any Black Americans that got it in phase 3. So it's a correct statement. It's, because nobody got it. You take people that are, and I wrote this down in the books. Now, I wrote the book several months ago, and it just got out there, like a couple of weeks ago. And I pointed out that I thought that the two groups that they would go after first are the healthcare providers front line and the elderly. Why? Because the healthcare providers probably are the most healthy. They've seen the disease. They're not going to say no, viruses don't exist. I mean, they're not trainers. They have reality checks, right? And what else do we kind of have that attitude of? Well, my patients are dying. People are dying. They're looking for me for answers. I'm going to do the best I can do to take care of people, but I'll also put myself out there in harm's way if I can help kind of move this thing along, particularly as you get tired and exhausted and you put in longer hours and you start going, we've got to end the nightmare, right? So we're less likely to have a bad response. And we're going to put ourselves out there. And then you can hold us out and go, see, your healthcare providers did this for you. You should step up and do the same thing for them. And I think that's one of the tools they're going to use. And then they're going to do it in the very old who are prone to these comorbidities. And those are the ones I'm really worried about. I'm worried about the younger. I'm worried about the healthcare providers, because if it doesn't kill people, I think you've talked about it enough on your channel about all these other factors, these long-term sequelae that are going to be showing up, and we're going to see consequences of it, but everybody will just write that off afterwards, because it's like any bad experience once you've gone through it. It's like, well, at least we're not in that bad experience anymore. So who cares if, X percentage of the people have can't smell or have some type of drooling abnormality or have an irregular or have a sleep apneic problem related to it, or have myocarditis or cardiomyopathy, a weakened heart. But at least they lived, right? That's going to be the attitude. And then the older individuals, what will they do with those? Well, they were older and they were frail, and they're the ones most likely to die. So it's not the vaccine. It's just that they were more likely to die. Well, yeah, more likely to die if you give them something that's going to kill them.
Yeah.
If you're gonna sacrifice your people, I know this is probably a bad phrase. Man up. If you're gonna sacrifice your people, step up and take the bullet. And this is where I've made the comment that clearly the people making the vaccine are essential, because if they die, there's nobody to make the vaccine. So I think we should vaccinate all the people making the vaccine, all the executives in charge of those corporations and their families, all the people that are pushing for it politically, all the governors who want to learn how to practice medicine and are now telling the doctors in the United States how to practice medicine, and all the judges that are going to be sitting there in court deciding whether people should be punished for whether they take this vaccine or not.
And there's a comment.
And all the grifters that are out there who don't believe that that viruses are real and that we've already done the work.
And there's a comment here, and I haven't seen it reported as such, but I've seen people mentioning it. So there were, as we said, people, if you had an allergy, you were excluded. But now at vaccination sites, they're required to have respiration and recovery equipment to hand, right, in case you go into anaphylaxis, right? And
oh God.
So we're at a very
Bill Gates should be vaccinated.
Yeah, and again,
in fact, I'd be willing to do the vaccinating for him. He wouldn't get it in the arm either.
I'll leave that to people's imaginations.
Yeah.
But
well, it got you kicked off. You did.
It did, yeah. And well, I mean, the other channel had a few thousand subs, and it does, right? Those few thousand subs, it doubles the viewership, right? So we have a really nice community built around the Discord, and a lot of everyone contributes to that, and that sort of keeps me. I don't have to go looking for data. I'm having to just go through data that people bring to me, and it's enough, and it's really useful thing to have that sort of community available. But just getting out to a wider audience, those extra subs that would normally just say, "Oh, that's on," and I'll watch, and they're probably just sort of peripherally. You feel that loss, especially at such small channels. And the thing is, we're not doing a 10-minute soundbite that YouTube that's what people want, where they and then they get all that it drops into their head, and then everyone thinks they're an expert. And
there's a lot to be said for forcing people to carry out a more complex thinking process, because it allows them to better handle more complex scenarios. And when you dumb it down and shorten the segments, it's terrible. One of the things, one of my classic examples was back when I took cell biology. And one of the people who actually taught me as a cardiology fellow was Krebs' last PhD student, Heinrich Techmeyer, who's a lousy human being, but
yeah, well, it's not uncommon in academia. So,
but in when I took cell biology, we had to memorize the Krebs cycle, and by that I don't mean we had to memorize the names. We had to be able to reproduce from scratch the molecules, and everybody moaned and groaned at the time. And I've since gone back and lectured several times at the university, usually to undergraduates and graduate students, and point out to them that, nobody liked it at the time, but what it taught us was that something that we thought we couldn't do, we could do. Something that we wanted to be lazy to not have to do, we weren't allowed to be lazy. We were forced to apply ourselves. And it's amazing we talked about this with the PhD earlier. When you're forced to apply yourself and learn the process to carry through it, you suddenly develop the ability to sort out details of a problem. And it also makes you less likely to be gullible to the grifters.
Well, and look, there's I think there's an important point that needs making here to people who are listening who are coming at this, and you trained in something else, and what you do is equally as important. So I know a few people that have got farms and cows, and I'm not going to be able to do much on your farm. I'm good with power tools, etc. But herding animals, and if they're not monkeys, I can't do that, right? And so everyone,
Kevin, look, I was raised on a farm. I'll take you to these people's places, and we'll teach you how to milk cows and ride and saddle horses, and
oh, my prostate wouldn't take it now. The years of cycling have taken it out of me. I just
we used to get. So I went to medical school at the University of Iowa. And I know where you're going with that. A complete understanding. You know, anybody who thinks that having a farm is an easy task really needs to spend a week on the farm and see what it's like. It's not an easy task. It's long hours. It's a lot of hard work, and it's smart work. One thing people don't realize is that in the 60s and 70s, there in Iowa, where I grew up at, there were more farmers' wives that had PhDs than you would ever imagine, because they were very smart and they had to know and help to run the farm. And if you think a John Deere tractor is something that's easy to run, those things, some of them are run by satellite. You know, it's not for kids. But anyway, we used to, when I was at Iowa and a medical student, we'd get these kids from New York and the big city, and they would come in and they wanted to see a farm. So we'd take them out and we'd show them hogs. And we'd show them things that would stand up to their shoulder, and they were just like, these things get this big. It's like, oh yeah, they do. And don't be dumb enough to put your arm out there. These animals are smarter than you think they are. So, medicine, farming. I come from a farm family.
And the point is that there's a degree of technobabble around these disciplines that we're talking around that comes that it's a way of differentiating themselves. That's how the disciplines do it. And I don't want people to come here and think, oh, I'm not catching what it is that they're saying, or if you feel it doesn't quite make sense, ask a question. Right, to ask the question, because often the questions can take you somewhere where we wouldn't have thought to go, and there's not so around the vaccine. Look, I'm not an epidemiologist and I'm not an immunologist. The only thing that I can bring to this is something with respect to the scientific understanding and methodology, and I would just have this one point to make. Have you tested and experimented enough? Okay, and that would be my question in this, and everyone can ask that question, and there's no shame in asking that question to these people.
Oh, exactly. You know, remember I made the statement about this is what I would do for my father, my mother, my brother, my sister, my husband, my wife, my children. Would you give this vaccine? Would you literally give this vaccine to your father, go down the list? If you can't answer that honestly and go, yeah, I feel pretty comfortable with that, then you should be asking yourself what more work you need to do to get to that point of level, because you may not be my brother, but you're a human being that I'm treating. Yes, and if there's something that's being said that you don't understand, all you need to do is ask the question, because then that means we need to explain it more. And we do typically then go down a pathway. And I saw something about Guillain-Barré. Yes. And I took care of people who had Guillain-Barré in the 70s when I was an orderly who had received the swine flu vaccine from a vaccine that was rushed through so fast by the US government that 25% of the population got it. And one of the consequences was the neurologic abnormality Guillain-Barré, and
that happened again in 2011. Was it 2009, 2011? They did exactly the same thing.
So what we've learned from the FDA is that they don't have a very good track record of actually thinking through the details of things. And I've called them on several things. And one of the papers I wrote at the beginning of SARS CoV-2 had to do with a diet drug that was pulled off the market. But it was a drug that was approved by the FDA. And at the time, in 2 years, 2017 to 2018, or 2016 and 2017, the FDA approved 105 drugs. It withdrew almost 300. So its track record of having to withdraw drugs that it already approved when they were just happy, where they had done their, quote, due diligence and safe and effective, doesn't look very good when you look at the track record over time. And if you're in an agency whose job it is to make sure what you're giving to the public is safe and effective,
Mm.
and you have, say, number one, then you should be doing your job. Number two, when your track record is so pathetic, now you should be even more concerned with, do you have the data? And I watched those hearings the other day where they did the emergency use authorization with that little committee. And I found it embarrassing as a scientist to watch. And sadly enough, the smartest guy there was the attorney, and he decided to abstain from the vote.
Mm.
It's like the only guy at the attorney was the only one getting it.
Mm.
I mean, and you people, I mean, if I have a law degree, but you have no idea what I really think of attorneys. It's not positive. So when the attorney seems to be asking the smartest questions, but then he abstains in the end from a vote, it's like, wow, you know, could we just all step back one more minute? You know,
no computers right now. So sorry to interrupt you. The point or issue I'd like to sort of raise at this point is what those clinicians and the scientists on that FDA panel should have been trained to do and be doing is saying, is this better than the treatments we have currently? And that's something that I don't see being an approach being used in any manner whatsoever, particularly in the US. So in India right now, I saw that they're selling blister packs with the sheep dip, the malaria medicine, and an antibiotic and zinc, right? As a blister pack and their cases have gone down. Okay.
Yeah. Again, I'm critical of the people that are doing it without getting the scientific data that they should along the way. But I can tell you from our research that we did, 83% of the people who were PCR positive who got treated with an aminoquinoline, either hydroxychloroquine or primaquine, and one of the antibiotic regimens that isn't to prevent a secondary infection, but is designed to reduce the replication of the virus or the attachment of the virus, and zinc, 83% of those people did not get sicker. They, within 3 days, when they were followed up, they were clinically better and did not require hospitalization. The AAPS, the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons, are trying to get this taken seriously. I also watched the hearing last week on early treatment for SARS CoV-2, and that was a disaster. I mean, watching television of politics in the United States these days is exhausting because it's so polarized. It's not even funny. In that case, the Republican was giving the doctors way more credit than they should have been, and the Democrats were attacking the doctors. And you know, and as a doctor, I'm sitting there going, "Wait a minute, buddy, you're not a doctor. You've got somebody who's telling you he's getting a treatment response. We should be treating people with this." Yeah, the attacks on hydroxychloroquine is that it causes cardiac problems, but there's not a single paper that states that there's cardiac problems. There's a lot of them that says it has cardiac problems. Really? Because QT prolongation, the problem that occurs from hydroxychloroquine, also occurs from the inflammation caused by the infection, number one. Number two, the reason why QT prolongation, stretching that EKG out, is a problem is because of two rhythms it produces. One is called ventricular polymorphism, and the other one is called torsade de poids, and there is not a single published paper, nor a single preprint that I have read that suggests that anybody taking hydroxychloroquine has had ventricular polymorphism, autre ça déploie. So
let's.
what's the problem?
So I think a lot of people have sort of gone over this what we're talking about right now. I think if you don't mind, whilst I have your time and attention,
Another topic?
Because I do think it's of importance. It's not it's not out of left field of what we're talking about, but it's a dimension of the dialogue around SARS-CoV-2 that is not mentioned. Well, no, let me rephrase that. It's mentioned in ways in the more feverish ends of the information highway. And it seems to me that we have a very, very obvious. So the conflict of interests. So let's just start with ones that we're very, very familiar with, right? The conflict of interest with respect to EcoHealth, Peter Daszak, the authors of the proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2 paper, people being compromised with respect to, well, we had, since we last spoke, there was the Freedom of Information leak, which showed that Peter Daszak was going round the clinicians and scientists, corralling them into a narrative control, damage control, in that it had to be a spillover, a natural zoonosis spillover event. So we can, I think, let's push the bounds of the conversation. You know, we got, again, we're just walking into a ban, right? You're just walking straight into but the let's speak about conflicts of interest. Let's keep it abstract, okay? And as someone with some legal background, would you relay to us your opinion on the severity of what a conflict of interest or what it means legally, and what the consequences for it are?
Consequences. Well, today
I'm what the consequences should be. Yeah, sorry, because that's a.
Oh, you want me to be a judge?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd rather have a cold shower. Okay, so conflict of interest is exactly what it sounds like. Something in what you're doing, you have the ability to benefit from if the outcome occurs favorably for you. And if the outcome occurs negatively towards you, it would harm you. So there is a conflict going on of interest to you, which raises the genuine question of how genuine will you be in reporting the results. Now, I'm a firm believer that if you enter a study, your data is part of the study. I don't drop out people. I don't try any extrapolations. I don't do any intent to treat garbage. You're a number, you're real, you're there. I may not like it, but it doesn't matter. But when people start selectively enrolling people based upon what will make a better outcome for them, when people start looking at the outcomes and go, well, there's a lot of studies that I see that when I read through it as a reviewer, all the people that get dropped out of the study along the way, my response is, well, why did you drop those out? I mean, yeah, nobody who was African American had a problem with the vaccine. You just didn't have any African Americans get the vaccine. Well, are we going to use this vaccine for Black people? So a conflict of interest really is where you know that what you're doing, that you're not being completely honest with the outcome of the data, And, you know, we have a whole host of people, Bill Gates, Dazak, um, Eurohealth, um, anybody who has expressed a political opinion on this and it has an outcome has a conflict of interest. Um,
And
I think that when there's a conflict of interest, go ahead. You want to ask?
sorry, Richard. I just wanted to say that that list actually goes on and on and on in these days, and I can't remember who it was, but someone put it in these terms, which I thought on a stream one day, that basically said it's the Enronization of the basically the whole of society, where the we're no longer holding people to account, and everything's just now being considered through the lens of that's the cost of doing business, in a sense.
Yeah. So that's an interesting analogy because, in my parents' generation, they got a job for life, and the employer considered it their responsibility to keep them employed, and the employed thought it was their job to do a very good job for the employer. So they kind of felt like they were in it together for life. Today, in the interest of making money, it's all about where you can cut corners, what you can manipulate to make more money for your bottom line.
Mm.
In one of the phrases that I have used for people with medicine when I try to get across the importance is, we don't sell shoes. Now, I can make that statement because when I was in high school, I also sewed shoes to earn money at JCPenney's. And if the shoes were bad, they brought them back, right? But when you mess up in medicine, people die. So the conflicts of interest that are going on here have to do with people having serious health problems or dying. That changes the parameter. There's a lot of things in science you can look at and say, well, can somebody else reproduce the experimental study? Maybe it wasn't quite as credible as we thought. But when you get into conflict of interest things, these are things that people intentionally do that they should not do, that they know they shouldn't do, that compromise the outcomes and the conclusions and what people do as a result. What do I think should happen to those people? Well, it depends upon which one of my hats you put on. Okay, if you put on my father's hat, sending to them their room, possibly with some other punishment, would be just a good beginning. Okay, but when you're dealing with the fact that, God, Kevin, there's a whole bunch of names that run through my brain when I'm thinking about that, and some of them I think ought to be put in prison. Okay, because people are dying.
Well, this is the point where I want to get to, is just that where can we draw the line? Let's just say right now, with all the characters, that's it. Right. That's all we have to deal with. Where do we draw the line with respect to culpability here? And to me, now that's not clear, because everything is so tainted. It was tainted even before SARS CoV-2 came out. It's just become highly apparent.
Yeah, now we've accepted that. We'll just accept people doing wrong things, right? The ends justify the means. Well, the ends here are different. The ends here are people are dying. The ends here, we've shut down the planet. The ends here is that we've got, I don't even know how many millions are infected. More than 1.5 million have died. We have people lying about whether viruses exist. We have people lying, I think, about whether the vaccines work, all in the name of money. We have people that are lying about the research that went into the development of this virus. We have people at government levels, at federal agencies, and I guarantee you there's a lot of people out there who think that they're doing the right thing for the right reason because they've bought into this thing. But independent upon some of the lower things, I would argue that the people who know that this virus was human made, released, and didn't take action to stop it and to bring the information forward, should undergo a Nuremberg in world court to be held accountable. I do not believe, based upon how this planet functions and the way in which, country to country to country interacts each country, I think we have to view this as an international criminal offense.
Well, and yeah, it has to by definition, because one, it's crossed borders, and there's a very big problem actually sitting at the heart of this when you sort of start scratching around the virology world, that there's no paperwork required with respect to transport of viruses across borders. They can just walk across it, so long as the institute has agreed to let it out the door, or let them. I mean, apart from obviously prescribed biowarfare agents, but agents that are under research, supposedly like coronaviruses, there's no controls that have to be filled out with respect to the airport. I have.
China is not the only culpable country here.
No.
And if people think the United States is innocent in this, they're wrong. But it's not just the U.S. and China.
And we are in a well, it's an existential crisis of, well, like I say, I guess we're not racking up bodies quite like the Second World War, but as an impact culturally, I would say we're getting there. So it seems a fair take to say, yeah, something approaching Nuremberg type trials. So okay, so I'll go with that. At what point do we hold, or do we stop culpability? Because in my mind right now, it's not just the fact that you can say that there are institutes and individuals with conflicts of interest. It's that institutes, and then how are we going to make the institutes culpable in this sense, and in something this serious?
Well, the institutes or the journals or any of the other things that are involved in the process and the perpetuation, I think, first off, any university or any institution that knowingly participated in misinformation about this virus is going to have to be revamped or shut down.
And I'm of the opinion right now that with respect to institutes, it's got to go, got to be shut down. Build a new one, and well, okay, let's constrain it a little bit. So the virology, the discipline of virology, there are virologists speaking out, but there seems to be a whole lot keeping very, very quiet. And this especially seems to be the case in the United States.
Yeah, well, this has to do with some of the nonsense that, so let me give you a more specific example that's not in virology. Lantheus Pharmaceuticals lied and has continued to lie to the world about its radioactive tracers needing 2 doses to be given to each patient. Now, they say that's because the drug doesn't move around to redistribute. They have now gone back and told the FDA, because I've pushed the button on this, that, well, no, the drug does redistribute, just not well. And it's up to the doctor how to do it. Now, Lantheus Pharmaceuticals knows this. They know that they have made $20 billion in 2 decades of extra profit. They know that 100,000 Americans are misdiagnosed with critical heart disease each year because of it and die. And they know that they've exposed the planet to 3 million extra curies of radiation. Lantheus Pharmaceuticals should be held criminally liable and closed as a facility. And anybody that was involved in the knowing of that information and misinformation should never be allowed to work in the field again once they're out of prison. So I would take the same point of view with SARS CoV 2. Anybody who was involved in this knowingly should be indicted on criminal murder charges for the deaths that have occurred. They should be held accountable in international court. Their corporations should be shut down. I'm sorry there's people working there with them that will be out of a job, but they worked at a company that was doing something bad, and I'm pretty sure the vast majority of them had some clue what was going on. But if they're really good people, I guess I would say we should look at them being hired, but under controlled circumstances to make sure that they weren't part of the problem. I think the NIH and NIAID needs to be scrapped and restarted. I think I have questions about whether the FDA should be scrapped and restarted, and HHS scrapped and restarted.
Well, HHS has given nearly $100 million to EcoHealth. That to me is enough of a reason. Who authorized all that? The other problem that I see right now, and it's this, and I've got it's lunchtime and I can hear the kids going, they're going to make a mess. But maybe this is the last point I'll ask your opinion on. But we're very good at creating, I think, a circular firing squad for ourselves. My concern is, I'm sorry, Sylvan, in the chat, China, who does have a part to play in this, right, are just going to ignore anything that would come down to causing them that would somehow show the CCP in some form of bad light. So my concern here is that in what way do we hold everyone accountable? Because we'll do it to ourselves, and they'll just carry on, and they'll just think, great, they're just weakening themselves even further. And this is a problem I've tried to think about for a long time, and I don't have a good answer.
What do you do with a bad child who won't listen?
Well, you take off your belt and you give the blighter a good thrashing. That's
okay. Well, you isolate them.
Yes, I guess so.
Yeah.
Okay, Karen.
If in a world court, would this planet, had Adolf Hitler not committed suicide and he still maintained control of Germany, and the German people would not have given him up, would the world court have allowed Nazi Germany to continue to prosper?
Probably not. I mean,
should a country that's culpable, whether it's China or the United States, who's unwilling to step up and be held accountable in world court, and have its leaders that were responsible charged with criminal murder, should such countries then be personally isolated by the rest of the planet until such time that it's determined that they've changed their ways?
Yeah, and like I say, I don't. The problem is that there's just very dark.
We don't
outcomes.
come out of this. We don't come out of this without having to address that. It's kind of like the joke, life. Nobody gets out alive. You know, we can either ignore what happened and let it continue to occur again, which is where I raised the question of how do we know the mRNA in the vaccine is actually SARS-CoV-2
Mm.
and not SARS-CoV-3, because nobody's holding the Pfizer or anybody accountable
Mm.
to showing to showing that it's actually SARS-CoV-2.
Mm.
Hmm?
Mm. Yes,
So,
I agree, and I think on
it's
that,
lunchtime.
yeah, I've got to go somewhere else. So, Richard, thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure. And
that was a kind of dark presentation, wasn't it, folks? Sorry about
well, just I think let's just take hope on that. What seemed like dark turned into light very, very quickly, right? And so life still goes on, right?
Right. And what's it all about? What's the end motto?
Mm.
It's all about our kids.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we need to stand up and actually address the problem.
Mm.
For the children,
Mm.
my children are a little bit older, but they're still the world to me. And that's what I'm doing this for, is to, and that's why I tackled these problems, is for them and for the children.
Mm.
And hopefully they'll do it better than we will.
Yeah, yeah. Let's say better me going to fight right now than them. And that's.
I can't wait to see the full clip on this. Go take care of lunch. It was a pleasure to see everybody again.
Yes.
I know I had this up, but I wasn't really looking at the comments, so I hope it answered a lot of questions for people.
Okay, thank you very much, guys, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.